Jeff Rubin Show. I am Jeff Rubin, and today I am honored to be joined by Jay Levey, Weird Al's manager, who has also directed many of Weird Al's music videos, as well as the Weird Al movie, UHF. Welcome to the show, Jay.
That's a true story.
Because you have been with Al since the beginning, right?
Since the Earth's, as he would say, since the Earth's crust cooled, yes.
What year was that?
Oh, man. I guess it would be somewhere around 1981.
And how did this relationship get started?
The way it got started was I was a manager for just a select few people, primarily working with I was living in Los Angeles, and I was working with the noted DJ, Dr. Demento. Mm-hmm. And for those who don't know, Dr. Demento, he's still going, but he's primarily going at this point on radio, on internet radio. At that time, he was a big deal and was for many, many years in syndicated radio with a show that was all comedy and novelty music. And I was working with the good doctor who goes by the real name of Barry Hansen. And it was right at the time that Al was, I guess he was just finishing college. He, at that point, and then just started a job, like a day job, was sending in tapes to Dr. Demento. He became sort of like, very quickly, he became kind of the lead artist, if you will, for the Dr. Demento show with his parodies and even his the originals that he was sending in, where he would just send in the recordings he would make on his using his accordion in his bedroom, and just send them into Dr. Demento, and became huge on the Dr. Demento show. So in this little bubble, which was I guess several million people that would listen to the Dr. Demento show, he was giant. He was the Beatles, For the rest of the world who didn't listen to Dr. Demento, he was still relatively unknown. And then what happened was basically, so it was through the Dr. Demento show that I met Al, and we invited him one day to a gig. We would set up shows with Dr. Demento that we would do in clubs, small theaters, where he would do his DJ thing live and show short movies, short films and stuff like that. And we would occasionally have a live guest, and we invited him to come out. I think it was in Phoenix, where we were playing in a club, and it was just him and his accordion, and he came out, he did a 20-minute set, and he just killed. He just, mopped him up, and it was extraordinary to sort of watch the reaction from the crowd. It was one of those epiphanal moments, of, it was just like, holy cow. I mean, it was without a band, without anything. So after that, he came off stage, and I just sort of looked at him and said, have you thought about doing this, professionally? And he kind of looked at me almost like I must be kidding, and said, well, yeah, of course. Like he had always really wanted to do that. And we started from there.
That seems like it might have been a little bit crazy at the time, because was there a large market for comedy songs and novelty songs, or was it just Dr. Demento?
It was just Dr. Demento. And you could pretty much say, there was a market when I was growing up. I'm showing my age. I guess I showed my age when I told you when we first started working together. But, growing up, I listened to, and Al listened to, we had the same heroes, which is part of what led me to Dr. Demento. And then to Al, I would listen to Alan Sherman and the Smothers Brothers and Tom Lehrer. And I was glued to those guys. And that was a relatively large, Firesign Theater. There was a relatively large, Stan Freberg, it was a relatively large, certainly never as large as regular pop music. However, it was at a time when, on the pop charts, you would have the Beatles next to "They're Coming to Take Me Away, Ha Ha" by Napoleon the 14th, which is some whacked out,
yeah, I kind of
single, right? So the comedy singles would chart. They would actually chart. Then radio got very structured and got very, very, very selective, and It got very narrow, and then that became very difficult to do. So there was a point at which basically, certainly when I met Al, there's a long-winded answer to your question, there was no other market really except for Dr. Demento.
Was there something you saw in Al that made you think he could break through that Dr. Demento bubble and into the mainstream?
Just sheer talent. I wasn't thinking about, well, this is a tough market. It's going to be tough to crack. I was thinking, this guy's really good, and he's really smart, and he's really clever. He was really musical. There was no question of his musicality, all those things. And I just looked at this, and and watched him and thought, he is a giant talent, and he will fill a void. I mean, in a way, it was almost, if I was thinking at all about the marketplace, I was almost thinking about it in that way, like, well, there's nobody out there doing this, and and doing it certainly at this level and the level that he would be capable of. And in my mind, of course, I'm thinking what he would be capable of and in his mind as well. I mean, we were totally thinking the same from the first day, was putting a band together and doing records that sound like the originals. So, to sort of burst above that sort of novelty aspect of a guy with an accordion,
Was there precedent for that? Had anyone done parody songs? I mean, there were silly songs where there parodies that sounded like the originals and changed the lyrics.
Alan Sherman.
Alan Sherman did that.
He was the guy.
He did Hello Mudda, Hello Fada, right?
That's right.
But that's not based on an that's the one I know, but that's not based on an original song, is it?
Sure it is. What is it? The Dance of the Hours? Or
Oh, that's interesting.
Oh, yeah. He did all parodies. Those were every single one of his songs where he took music from somewhere else. But they were not pop songs.
That's interesting because to me, all these years later, I know Hello Mudda, Hello Fada, and that has superseded the original. I don't even know the thing it's based on.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of songs growing up with Weird Al. There's a lot of songs that when I hear the opening chords do on the radio, I immediately go to the Weird Al version instead of the actual one.
Well, but younger listeners today, they don't know from Huey Lewis or the various people in these parodies. So it's kind of the same thing where they just figure it's based on a pop song, but they don't know who it is.
Yeah, they don't know who it is specifically. So when you sign an artist like Weird Al as a manager, what are your first steps? How do you start conquering the world?
Well, it went pretty quickly. I mean, we were as quickly as I almost hesitate to say as it should have, meaning he had that amount of talent and drive and interest in succeeding that it was relatively simple. I mean, basically the idea is, well, back in those days, you get a record contract, right? Mm-hmm. That's what you shoot for. Today, it's a lot different with, the whole record industry devolving. It's kind of quite a sight to watch as it goes on. But then it was all about getting a record contract. So we would, the first thing we did was, he came up with the new songs that he wanted to parody, and just figured it would happen from there, which it did. What happened was the big song of the day was "I Love Rock and Roll," Joan Jett's song. So he came up with "I Love Rocky Road." And, so what you do is and from day one, as anyone who knows Al's story, we've always asked for permission from the writers and the artists. It's just,
which legally you don't have to do.
Well, it's tricky. We don't know that for sure. No one's ever tested it to that degree. It's been tested in court at the Supreme Court, actually, with a case with Two Live Crew.
Right, the Pretty Woman.
And Roy Orbison, that's right. But it was highly, highly selective in terms of the ruling that the court made. It was very nuanced. So you could look at that ruling and not necessarily instantly come to the conclusion that there's, a First Amendment right here or anything like that. But nonetheless, we never decided we wanted to try it. I mean, Al, he is a very easygoing, non-confrontational kind of person. And in his mind, he always wanted the artist to be in on the joke. And his type of humor was always so good-spirited that we just figured that they would be. And then they were. I mean, when we contacted 30 years ago to now, I mean, we can count on basically one hand the number of people who don't have a sense of humor who basically said no. But so he just decided from day one, let's get permission. So I went to the writer of I Love Rock and Roll, whose name was Jake Hooker.
Not Joan Jett.
Not Joan. She did not write it. That's right. So Joan would have nothing to say about even though, I don't know if Jake ever actually went to Joan and said, by the way, there's this unknown guy named Weird Al who's going to do this parody. I hope you're cool with it. Of the song that Jake, wrote. I don't know that he ever actually did that, frankly. Mm-hmm. Most of the time, the songs are written or co-written by the stars, by the artists.
So you go to the writer of the song, not necessarily the artist.
But like I said, that's usually the artist. But you're right. Technically, it's the writer who needs to grant the permission that we are looking for, that we don't want to confront, right? So we went to Jake, and Jake said, I think this is not only a great idea, but I manage Rick Derringer. Now, Rick was the lead guitarist, lead singer, and lead writer for an old band called the McCoys, who were famous for a song back in the 60s called Hang On Sloopy. Mm-hmm. And Rick is also a stellar guitar player. He played with Steely Dan, many others. And he was also a producer. And Jake managed Rick. So he said, what about I package this with Rick. We'll produce it. We'll get let's find a studio. I've got a friend I think who'll sign on, give us studio time on spec, which means we don't pay for it until we've made a deal. And, it sounded like a great deal at the time. We had nothing else going. And that's the kind of thing you want to put together when you're looking for a deal, because that's the kind of tape you want to shop as opposed to something you've done in your basement. Mm-hmm. So we said, absolutely. We went into the studio. We cut a full album and used that to shop to the studios, to the labels.
What other parodies were on that first album?
Well,
is My Bologna is one of the first,
My Bologna,
right?
which he had already done and recorded, of course.
Did you get in touch with the Knack after recording it to make sure that they were okay with it?
They were already okay with that. Through their story is that before this was like maybe, I guess it was, a year or so before I got with him, he had on his own recorded My Bologna in the college bathroom station across from the radio station where he was the DJ known as Weird Al. That's how he got his name. So he had recorded that. It became huge on Dr. Demento. The Knack heard about it. They were fans of Dr. Demento. So they heard about it. They called up Capitol Records and said, you got to sign this guy. And they said, and the Knack was gigantic at that time. So, when the late Doug Feiger, he just passed very tragically.
Oh, I know that.
Yeah, of cancer. And he said to Capitol, you got to sign this guy. Capitol said, well, sure, okay, whatever. And signed him. There's an actual contract, which actually a copy of which you can see in a book that's coming out now called Weird Al the Book that Abrams is publishing.
I want to read that book because I love Weird Al, obviously, and it's co-written with Nathan Rabin, right?
That's
from
correct.
The AV Club, and I love both those people, so that they're coming together.
Yeah,
I can't wait to read that book.
Right. And you can see the actual contract, where you got paid a $500 advance and for this, and they put out, but the contract was for a single. They never were serious about it, really. I guess if he had blown up huge, they would have gotten serious about it, as anybody would. But it didn't really. They didn't promote it. It just kind of fizzled away. So that had been done prior to my being with him. So that was on. So that was on the album. So what were the other? The new ones, Stop Dragging My Car Around,
Sure.
which was a parody of Stop Dragging My Heart Around with Tom Petty and Stevie Nicks.
Did you get in touch with Tom Petty and Stevie Nicks? Because now I can imagine
it's
an honor to be parodied by Weird Al. I remember...
No, and it was like, who? Yeah,
Yeah, I remember
Sure.
Chameleonaire saying like he knew he had made it when Weird Al did a parody of his song.
The most famous story of that is Kurt Cobain with Nirvana, who said those exact same things.
And so several people have said over the years, but imagine when you're just starting out, you're getting a lot of... What is this?
Right. Well, our joke was,
and especially Tom Petty and
that's right.
and Stevie Nicks. These are all due respect to the Knack. These are musical legends.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Well, the joke was we did this joke actually later in a special that we did called The Complete Al, which was a takeoff on The Complete Beatles.
Oh, I've seen it.
So in that there's this joke. I mean, there's a guy that plays me, and we call him Barry Cohen. And Barry's on the phone, and he says, I manage this guy named Weird Al Yankovic. And then there's a pause, and he goes, what do you mean that's too bad? And that really happened. That was based on, actual conversations.
That's funny.
Have. Sure. But most people actually had a really good sense of humor. There were very few people, even when he was unknown, who passed. I don't even remember if anybody passed on our first requests that first time around. We had Rick Derringer producing us. We had a studio to go into. It was a good thing. It was people had a generally good sense of humor. But then the single, we did that and we shopped, and I think, how did this work? At the time, I don't think we had cut Ricky. It was a parody of Mickey by Tony Basil. Pretty obscure these days. Most people wouldn't know.
No, I think people know that.
You think people know?
That's it's one of the big 80s hits, I think.
Well, there you go.
If you're doing
yeah.
If you see an 80s music commercial, I'd say there's a 1 in 3 chance you're going to hear Mickey as one of the songs scrolling past.
Well, then, yeah, good. So that's, so we actually, rewinding back, what got us the deal the record deal was the parody of I Love Rock and Roll. Because we first shopped that tape without Ricky having been done, got nowhere. Everybody passed. Jake was even trying to help us out. Jake had various connections. But one of Jake's connections was with this independent label called Scotty Brothers. And their big hit was Survivor, Eye of the Tiger.
Great song.
That was all they had, though. Mm-hmm. I mean, these guys, it was a very, very small operation. But they actually originally passed along with everybody else. We took the song, just the tape of that song. At the time, radio would do stuff like, top 40 radio stations would have contests. And this one, and I forget the name of the station, but the actual call letters. But it was a major station in LA, which is obviously a big deal. And they would do the funny countdown or something like this.
Yeah.
Where they would do at 9:00 at night, they would, just play these songs that got sent to them that were not pressed, that were not on anything, on any records. And we submitted I Love Rock and Roll, I Love Rocky Road, the parody of I Love Rock and Roll. The finished master that we had created, with Rick Derringer in the studio. And it was crazy. I mean, it was number one instantly, and it might have been that for several weeks. But it was enough where the guy at Scotty Brothers, who actually wanted to sign us the first time around, his name was Tad Dowd, and he couldn't sell it upstairs. This time around, with this kind of attention, Tad went back to his people and he said, "Look, I'm telling you, look what happened here, Mm-hmm. It blew up, you got to," and they were reluctant, but they were but Tad was a good friend of Tony Scotti, who was they were like childhood friends. So Tony said to Ted, "All right, this will be your baby, let's see what happens with it." And so that's how the deal came. So by the time it came time to, all that happened, and it came time to now look at, what we're going to put out. Our goal was always, and always has been, if you followed Al and you know his story, we always try and come as closely to the original as possible. By the time we had got the deal and we were ready to come with a single, I Love Rock and Roll. I Love Rock and Roll was long over, and we needed something fresh. So that's when we picked. He scoured the market and the charts, and he picked Ricky to be the sort of add-on, if you will, that would be the single and would become the first video.
It seems like it was kind of successful right out of the gate, pretty much. I mean, you imagine, especially with something this unusual, that there'd be a startup phase where you're trying to get the name out. But it sounds like even on this first album, you got airplay immediately, you got signed pretty quickly. Did it seem that way at the time?
I'd say getting signed quickly felt pretty quick. I mean, we really didn't have to wait very long, before that happened. I mean, that was a great thing. It depends on how you define success. That first album really, it sold. It charted. I think I have to go back. I have to remember whether it charted. That was a long time ago. I think it did chart, but it wasn't what you'd call a hit album. It was a smash hit on Dr. Demento. His audience went nuts for it. Al was now the star of, he was already the star of the Dr. Demento show, and now, he's got an actual album with, it's half parodies, half originals, obviously all comedy. I mean, this is a big deal to his audience. It didn't really break hugely. I mean, yeah, we got some radio play on the morning shows, for the most part, which to this day is pretty much all we ever get, all he ever gets. I mean, even with all of his success years later, radio is so difficult. They're so narrow in how they view things and their formats and so forth. So it was successful enough, certainly, to do a second album. Mm-hmm. That's all we needed, because then came Michael Jackson and he did, and the rest was history.
Was there a point? Was that the album when you realized, oh my God, this thing is taking on a life of its own?
Well, yeah, because that was a top 10, I think it was top 10. I mean, it was a gold album. It was if it wasn't top 10, it was top 12, or I think it was somewhere there. The only reason that it stalled, it would have gone even higher, except for the fact that the record sold out so quickly everywhere that they ran out of stock. And it was a quote unquote novel. It was perceived as a novelty song, Eat It. And so, I guess by the time they would have pressed more and got more out, it would, and they did, but didn't make a difference in terms of the additional charting any higher. But the album was gold, and yeah, that's when it went. It was when, at the time he was the opening act for Dr. Demento on these shows that we would go out and do, or the special guest, if you will. And then immediately after that, he became a headliner.
You must be a very good manager to get Weird Al this popular. Not that Weird Al's not good, but to get, again, something this unusual, this popular, this quickly. Is there specific, unique challenges to managing an act like that you wouldn't have to deal with if you were managing a more traditional act?
I don't think so.
It sounds like
it's nice of you to say,
normal
but
story. Really.
It is a very normal story, and I have to say, as much as I certainly will acknowledge that I've done well by him, and I think that probably shows in the fact that we're still together 30 years later.
Yeah,
he's an extraordinary talent. That's all there is to it. There's only one Weird Al. There was only one. No, I shouldn't say this. I was going to say there was only one Alan Sherman. There were a few. There was him.
Yeah.
There was the Smothers. There was, Smothers Brothers. There was Stan Freberg. There, just a tiny group of comedy artists then. But music and radio got so narrow that to become successful at that level as a comedy artist, you've got to be incredible. And frankly, he is. So there was just never any doubt that it was so simple and easy to see, frankly, that the level of his songwriting, the level of his parodies, the way that he crafts a parody. When you go and you break down his music and the way he matches meter and the way he'll take a line of a song and he'll have a rhyme in there that will match the key rhyme of the original. There are things like that which might be obvious to his hardcore fans, but to the others who buy his albums just because they're, he's charting and it sounds great, it's almost subliminal that, they don't realize, but that's how good he is, So it was just always clear that he had the talent to just to always do it, even at a time. There was a famous time many years later where he had we stalled basically, but even when we stalled, it was he had such a sort of a 1, 2, 3, 4 punch kind of a career. It's just it was never a question of does he have it and will he fade. It was always just basically. He had the talent, and whenever we experience bumps in the road, we just overcome them. And it's not as much as it's through my persistence on a business level. It's because he always hands me the goods to work with.
What is that persistence? What do you actually do day to day as Weird Al's manager? What are the things you need to take care of? I don't know anything about managing anyone, really. Yeah. So it might just be the same as if I asked you what's it like to manage Stevie Nicks or whatever. But what do you actually do? Is Weird Al your only client?
He is. He's actually been. I've only managed a couple of other people over. I used to have a management company with a partner and employees who answered the phone and staff and all that. And there was a point at which I just decided, because I also, as you've announced early on, I mean, I direct and produce, but I also do things that have nothing to do with Al. I've done other things. I have other pet projects that I pursue those things as well because I love doing that. And he's always kept me so busy as an artist to manage. There's been a time, one in particular, back when this would be in the what would it be? I guess the mid or late '90s when I managed Miriam Makeba, who was known as the Queen of African music, and she was the special guest on Paul Simon's Graceland tour, and so we toured the world with Paul doing that tour, and it was really an incredible journey to be part of that. But that was only, I mean, mostly of my 3 decades of a manager. I mean, it's really mostly been him. He keeps me really busy. It's been basically a little cottage industry that he and I have sort of had going, So to answer your question, it's really what any manager does. I mean, there are different, any career has various spokes of the wheel, There's recording, there's live concerts and appearances, there's his acting and voiceover work. There's just various things that he will do, and I'm basically corralling and promoting, if you will, and encouraging, if you will, the work in all those different areas, combining with fielding the requests. Now, I mean, Al being, essentially an icon, it's a combination of things we pursue, and probably more so fielding the requests that come in that he either doesn't have the time or the interest to do,
Yeah, but I imagine there's a lot of them. Icon's the exact right word for it.
Yeah.
Did you get into directing because you needed to make some music videos and you were just there to direct them, or was that something you were always interested in?
No, I can't say it was something I was always interested in. It was just, there was a certain conceit on my part that he went along with. In other words, and it's not, and I'm saying this not that it was against that conceit. It was simply that Al knew that I was a student of comedy. He knew that my heroes were his heroes. And we knew that we were in something of a bubble, that when it came time to do that, it's as much comedy as much as it is about music. It's not just music videos, And if you don't nail the comedy, it's not going to work. And you've got to be a comedy director for that, or you simply got to know comedy. And the conceit, which was a true one, was that I knew comedy. I mean, I certainly recognized and understood the jokes. He knew that I knew the jokes.
Mm-hmm. And that you were on the same page.
And that we were on the same page creatively, totally. So from the beginning, except I will say, with the first, it was, I guess, the first 2 videos we did, we had, 10 cents to make them. The Ricky video and the I Love Rocky Road videos. I did not direct those.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Those were done on video, which back then, today doing something on video, that's cool. That's what most people are doing now on HD, right? Mm-hmm. But back then, that's because you had no money.
Because you shoot on film otherwise?
You shoot on film, yeah. But, that's before that's Rocky Road and Ricky again were before he really broke wide open with Eat It. That was the first album.
Did those first 2 videos get any airplay on MTV?
Yeah, they did. Certainly enough to get him recognition. Mm-hmm. People look back and they go, wow, the first, amongst the first, there were, a handful of artists that were propelling MTV, if you will. And Al really was one of those artists, even without having a hit song, because they needed product for their video pipeline. Mm-hmm. And they had very few artists like him. And even though they were done on video and for 10 cents, they were good.
The video seemed like such a major part of Al's early success because he wasn't getting a lot of radio airplay, and the videos were funny and they stood out among everything else on MTV.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
Just a main part. So which was the first one you directed?
So what happened was we liked them. When I say they were good. They did the job, But, looking back at them now, anybody, any fan or, anyone really can look at those 2 videos and clearly see the difference. And it's not necessarily because from then on I was directing. It was a lot of it was because we were directing in a sense. I was directing in that when we hit, we had enough momentum and we were given enough of a budget for Eat It. I mean, after all, it was Michael Jackson, right? So I mean, these guys, they sort of felt like, well, we got to step up a little bit here. So they spent, I think the budget on that was $40,000, which, wasn't a huge amount of money for then. I think, a normal big budget video for a main artist was somewhere around 100, something like that.
It's a decent special effect when he, starts expanding in the beginning and the belt buckles start popping and stuff.
You're thinking of a different song.
Wait. I'm thinking of Fat. You're right.
Yeah.
Eat It. What's the video for Eat It?
So that was a parody of Beat It.
I'm so embarrassed. That's
all right. It was a long time ago, right?
Yeah. What happens in the Eat It video? I'm struggling to remember it. I'm sure I've seen it.
When you say what happened to it, what do you mean?
What happens in it? What is in the Eat It video?
Well, it's like the Beat It video. The most famous scene is he's at the pool table.
Right? Don't they do the spoon fight instead of the knives?
Yeah. That's right. But there's probably the most famous scene is Michael in Beat It is at a pool. He's at a pool hall at a pool table doing all of his moves, and Al is at the same pool hall at the same pool table doing Michael's moves. Mm-hmm. But yeah, there's the gang fight. In fact, we called up. We always have our hugest amount of fun is when we call up the people who were originally involved in the original project. So for that one, for instance, Vince Patterson was the choreographer on the Beat It video for Michael. And we called up Vince and we said, hey man, you want to be in the Weird Al video? We're doing this parody of Michael and of your work. And, we'd love you to be in the video. And he agreed to do that. So he's actually in the Eat It video and was the choreographer for us on that.
That's fun.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've done that over the years, right up till the last album where now Ray Manzarek, famously played on his Doors pastiche called Craigslist. But, that was part of a project. It gets a little complicated, but I'll do it without spending a lot of time. That was part of the Complete Al project because at the same time we were sort of propelling forward to sort of go to the next level. Once we had Michael's blessings, without even releasing the record, we felt like we would have something. We didn't know to what extent it would be a phenomenon, but we felt like it was going to be something much different than the first one. And off of that, we were able to sell this concept for this mockumentary called The Complete Al. No, I'm getting ahead of myself. You know what? I think it's, so I get embarrassed, right? Because this is a long time ago. No, I think Eat It was... I take that back. I think Eat It we did as a solo video, and it was off of that we then created. It was off of the Dare to Be Stupid album that we created the mockumentary Complete Al. So I need to backtrack there. So we made that video. The reason I was thinking that is because I was supposed to direct it with a buddy of mine named Robert K. Wise, who's still one of my dear friends. Bob was the producer of Kentucky Fried Movie and Blues Brothers movie, and later went on to do all the Naked Gun movies and all that stuff. There was...
Wait, is that how Weird Al ended up in all the Naked Gun movies?
Yes.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
I always wondered about that.
Although it was never a stretch. Bob would just, as the producer,
right.
Would say to the Zuckers, hey, you guys... Al's a buddy, you want to do a cameo with him. They'd always go, absolutely. And I think towards the last one, they were requesting him. Bob wasn't, I think at that point, he didn't even need to bring it up because the Zuckers love Al,
Yeah.
I mean, it's all the same kind of comedy family.
Match,
right?
Of course.
Yeah.
So
I ended up doing it myself. I'd never directed before. But Al and I, it was almost kind of I hate to say it, it was almost paint by number. Because what it is the comedy's got to work. So he and I, at that point, I wouldn't go so far as to call us comedy writers, but or partners, writing partners, but we certainly were creatively collaborating. Where I would contribute jokes and I would contribute comedy to it. It was fun for me. I mean, years later, it's clearly, not too much later, it got to a point where I needed to step away from that because he was clearly a genius to be reckoned with. And it was not my place, essentially, to be his comedy writer. Although a partner, although, obviously when we get to UHF, we'll talk about that. We did that, but the point is that we would create together the storyboards, and we just needed to execute those. And when you are physically executing the shot, at that point, you're watching the comedy. Mm-hmm. And if the comedy plays, you've got the shot and you move on to the next one. It's as simple as that. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It's like, so in a way, it's almost like, Hasbro's comedy paint by number kind of thing. I don't mean to make it sound like anybody can do it, because you've got to certainly understand comedy to be able to do that.
You just saved some listener like $120,000 on NYU Film School. Maybe. But I think the thing is, even if you didn't study formal directing, like you obviously studied comedy, and like all those your training was watching and just absorbing all that comedy over the years. So then when you put a camera in front of it, it's just, looking for.
Well, look, and it was not only that. When we're doing a parody, I mean, it's different when we were doing his originals, like Dare to Be Stupid and One More Minute. But especially when we're doing a parody, we had a monitor on the set. We would cue up Michael Jackson's original video. Mm-hmm. We would match the shot. That's part of the joke, is you match the shot. So there's nothing for me to do except to make sure to look and make sure that the shot is matched properly and that it's blocked properly, Mm-hmm. It's not a small thing, and I did it well, and I'm proud of my work. But I had a lot of help from Michael and from all the other people, mm-hmm. Who would give us that. I guess it was different. You've got to establish and create shots when you have an original and it's not a parody.
But even those ones that are originals, they're based like Dare to Be Stupid. It's like based on the aesthetic of a Devo video, right?
Totally.
So you have some sort of blueprint to work with.
That's right.
All right, we got to talk about UHF, because you broke the UHF seal and brought it up, because in addition to managing this artist was a huge part of my life growing up, and still to this day. You also happen to direct one of my all-time favorite movies, UHF. I suspect I may have seen UHF more than you have. Do you think that's possible?
Oh, I'm sure it's possible.
I've definitely seen UHF more than
possible.
You have.
It's a weird thing that a lot of people have about watching their own stuff.
Yeah, sure.
Tons of years went by without me watching UHF, and part of that was, I suppose I fully admit it was part of the quote-unquote commercial failure of the project that made it difficult to revisit it. And I didn't for, quite some time until I did fairly recently. I guess it was, not to say I didn't watch it at all in this gap, but it were a couple of years ago, some guys did a screening of it in Austin, Texas.
Was it at the Alamo Drafthouse?
That's right.
Yeah, I love the Alamo Drafthouse. I think he actually we had someone from the Alamo Drafthouse on the show, and I think I don't remember if he was talking about that screening specifically, but I think it definitely came up, and I think it was when I asked him what one of his favorite shows he's put on was, and I think that was one of them.
It was great. I mean, they knew they couldn't fit it in their normal 400-seat theater. They moved it to the Paramount, I think it was called, which was a 1,000-seat theater. They sold it out in like 10 minutes and broke their server, so they added a second screening. But part of what sold it out, I guess, is because they invited he and I to do a Q&A afterwards,
What was it like watching the movie with a crowd?
Well, that's my point. I mean, I'm jumping ahead, ahead of the story of how it got made.
Yeah.
But you're asking about watching it, and I hadn't watched it in really a long time until that point. And I was there. I was booked, right? I'm going to talk about it. And I'm thinking, I suppose I could go out and then come back, and I could still do a Q&A and know all the stories. And I certainly know the movie well. But I decided I was going to watch it with the audience, and it was just a cathartic experience, actually, because I genuinely laughed out loud. Well, part of the thing about that movie, which is, at the risk of, sort of blowing it up, that's your job to do, not mine. But
I'll do it.
But the thing about the audience, and I was right there with them, which is an astonishing thing to me, is that the laughter in the audience was not as much as there was the Rocky Horror thing of the people who knew the lines and would, and recite it. Equally so was genuine, fresh laughter. it wasn't the crowd. It was the crowd being preached to, but you can feel it. You know, laughter. You know what laughter sounds like. You know the laughter what it sounds like when you knew it was coming, and you have to. Though that's almost more of a cheer, and in fact, oftentimes it is a cheer. Mm-hmm. For the line you're waiting for.
Yeah, I remember that. There was some of that.
But otherwise, it sounded genuinely spontaneous. It blew my mind. And I was right there with them. I was watching the movie right there with them, and I was spontaneously laughing. And it was so cathartic. And it was such a great experience, frankly, because it held up. I mean, there's things, sure, we'd probably do differently now. But in general... I mean, it was the movie we essentially wanted to make, and it really held up, and so that's certainly what it was like for watching it that night.
Yeah, I think one reason that it plays like that is because it's so dense with jokes, and even if you've seen it 100 times, there's always going to be a few jokes that you don't remember just because there's so many of them, and there's so many jokes working at so many different levels that I remember when I saw it with an audience, that you could hear some people laughing at some of the more slapstick stuff, but there's also silly stuff that gets like a different pocket of the audience, and there's references that not everyone gets. So there's always all different types of laughter, different types of jokes whenever the movie plays. What was it like when it came out? Because it was a commercial failure.
Well, it's going to sound like an excuse, but it really is. I mean, what happened was, we made the movie we pretty much wanted to make. I feel confident saying that. I mean, the studio, Orion, they were known for Woody Allen and, for I want to say serious comedy makers, if there is such a thing. There is such a thing, actually.
Yeah,
people are very serious about their comedy. We were too, and we still are, and he still is. We made the movie we wanted to make. We were pretty pleased with it, We were very optimistic and hopeful for it. We didn't know what we had, but we thought we had something for sure. And what happened was Orion did a test screening or a couple of test screenings. They were in a lot of trouble as a studio. They were putting out movies they'd just spent an enormous amount of money in marketing and in the movie of Dennis Quaid and Great Balls of Fire. Mm-hmm. They were already in trouble. They had a streak that was a bad streak, basically, commercially. They were already in trouble. That movie really hurt them badly, and we were next up. There was rumors that they were going out of business. Anyway, they do a test screening with us, and our test numbers went through the roof. They hand out cards at these. For anybody who's ever been in a test screening, they know what happens. You go to these things, and they hand you a card, and did you like this movie on a scale of 1 to 5? What how would you rate it? What are your comments? All this sort of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, they get rated, and we were the highest rated movie for Orion since RoboCop. Wow. And these guys were going out of business. Mm-hmm. So they're like, oh my God, we've got a sleeper here. In other words, they not to say that it was ever perceived necessarily as, something. Let's put it this way. I don't think they didn't think they had a hit movie necessarily. I think they had a nice little comedy. Mm-hmm. That would sort of do nice business, and we thought probably the same. That would be enough to just get us to our next movie, the same way that Al's first album got him to his next album. In that sense, Mm-hmm. I think that's probably the kind of, if we had expectations, they were kind of like that. And so, but with these numbers, Orion, they didn't have the wherewithal to market it really properly, although we got full page ads, certainly. I mean, I don't want to completely fault their marketing, but, it was more like, they did a decent amount of marketing for what they could afford, and they put us out at the same time that Lethal Weapon, Indiana Jones, Do the Right Thing, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and Batman.
Yeah, that's what I remember.
Were all out at the exact same time.
So it's just a crowded market.
Forget it, man. You can't compete with that.
Because it was a summer movie.
Yeah. You can't. I mean, you simply can't compete with that. I mean, looking back, I almost think if we had, not to say that they would have listened to us, but I mean, we just went along with them. Look, we felt, blessed and honored to have our first movie and to have a real studio behind us and to think so highly of it, that of the movie that they put out in that market. I suppose if we had really, in hindsight, we could have screamed bloody murder and said, "Don't you dare do this! It's going to kill the movie." You would have thought they would have known that. It's like how you look back and you go, "What were they thinking?" Nothing can compete. I mean, you look at those movies. I mean, they were gigantic.
Yeah, those are still. It's crazy that all those movies were out at the same time.
At the exact same time.
And UHF, the best of them all.
Thank you.
It's number one.
So we got creamed.
There's a great cast in that movie, a lot of before they were famous people. And I remember when I saw a screening that you hosted, you told a great story about Michael Richards and how he got involved in the movie. And I was wondering if you could relay that story to the people listening to this.
Well, yeah, Michael, that I credit Al with, with that one in terms of from the beginning, his first notion, actually, I mean, he had certain casting ideas all along. We both did. But not a lot of them. And frankly, that was the key one. Because Stanley, we knew was the flashpoint, the comedic flashpoint, if you will. One of the things we may have done differently looking back, and I'm sure we would have done differently later, is Al almost played straight to Stanley in a way, but he constantly set Stanley up for the jokes, But that's I guess another story. But again, we were pretty happy with certainly nobody twisted our arm. That wasn't anybody else's idea to write the script that way. When we wrote the script, the role of Stanley Spadowski, his original idea, which I totally went along with, I thought it was a great idea, was Chris Lloyd from the Back to the Future movies.
Sure.
And, it's sort of one of those serendipitous, I think, things that Christopher Lloyd turned us down. He just... he wouldn't even read. When you make movies, what you do is you invite the people who you're interested in and or the people who are being pitched to you by their agents and so forth. They come in and they, quote unquote, read for you from the script. Chris wouldn't even read, So, and we couldn't get him to read. I think we begged probably a little bit because we were you get so used to getting your way after a while. We're really spoiled, I got to tell you.
Yeah.
I mean, looking back over, the years, it's really quite remarkable how spoiled we are.
In what ways were you spoiled?
Just, of all the people who say yes, and there's sort of a charmed, Al's got, if you look at it sort of, if you step back and look at it, it's very charmed. It's certainly deserved because, as I said at the very beginning, he has the talent that is deserved of that. But it's also very charmed. The people who have gone along with the joke, the people who appreciate the joke, the people who appreciate him, the kinds of, it's just, I don't know. What can you say? It's when you have you look back and you just, see so many luck and timing. People say in the business has so much to do with, with how the business works, and you need talent to go along with that to last the amount of years that he has. So he has all those things, but the luck and timing have a lot to do with it. So anyway, that's what I mean by that. And so we were used to people saying yes, but he didn't. And Al right away went to, let's try and get Michael Richards. He was a giant fan of Michael's from this old TV show called Fridays, which is a great show. Didn't last long on the air. It was a competitor to Saturday Night Live.
Right. That was Larry David.
Larry David was on that
Andy
show.
Kaufman.
That's right.
That's like Michael Richards is in that scene in Man on the Moon with. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. So it's a legendary show, but a lot of people don't know it. But it was what was sort of serendipitous about that is that it's funny, we had this. You see Chris Lloyd as the character he played as the professor in
Back to the Future.
In Back to the Future, and we saw him sort of doing that as Stanley. Well, to be honest, it's not real original, is it? And had we got Chris Lloyd, he probably would have said, I'm not going to do that same character for you. I'm going to do something else. We never got that far. But that's how we saw him, because it just would have fit. And if you think about it, that take on the janitor would have been pretty cool. It also would not have been very original. I'm not saying, Chris Lloyd would have been phenomenal. Obviously it would have been great. But Michael, it was more about recognizing his core talent as a comedian and what on earth will he do with this thing. We knew he would be physical because Michael's a very physical comedian. Mm-hmm. And when Michael came in, he talks a lot about his influences, and I guess Marcel Marceau, and there's I think another French actor named Tati who was very familiar to that audience. Michael is he's like a ballet dancer. He's brilliant physically. Mm-hmm. We knew that he would bring that to the party, So we invite Michael to come in, and Michael did come in. I think he came in. God, did he come in or he either, all I know is that we had to bring him back. What I'm remembering, I believe he came in, and then we offered him the part. He passed. And we were like, that can't be. Because it's not like he had a huge career. We couldn't grok that one. It was sort of like, what's that about? This is a decent script. He can really have a lot of fun with this. Mm-hmm. We don't understand this, frankly. This just doesn't make sense, kind of thing, So we told the casting director, you got to go back to him and tell him to come back. You've got to just do whatever it takes to get him back, in here so we can talk to him. And it's funny, that's sort of all it took. It's not, we did a little bit of cajoling, but basically it was almost like when he walked through the door the second time, it was like, okay, you want me that bad, you must... I think that translated in his mind to, he recognized the part, he recognized the value of the part, he recognized our value that we placed in him, because as any actor, you're always fearful of not being able to do what you want to do and being able to collaborate at the level you want to collaborate with, with the directing, with the director, with the producers. So once he came in, it was funny. It was a whole different demeanor the second time, where he was joking. And I think even at that time, there's this thing about that he did for that part where he wore these like prosthetic teeth. Mm-hmm. And if you look, now for people who don't really realize that, when you go back and you look at the movie, you'll see, his front teeth are like definitely pronounced. And that's because I think he actually even brought those in when he came back the second time. And he was like ready to go. But the first time he just passed for kind of, I don't know what that was about. We frankly never asked him. We were just happy to have him.
And he's so funny in that movie too. It's great because it's a funny Weird Al movie, and there's all these funny parodies. And then you almost forget that there's also this incredibly funny performance from him, and it probably his best performance outside of Seinfeld.
Yeah.
And it just, I don't know, just knocks you out every time you see it.
Yeah.
It's great.
He was amazing.
So you mentioned earlier that you co-wrote the movie with Al. Was that the only thing besides the videos, which you presumably collaborated on? Was that the only thing that you actually co-wrote with him in this whole partnership?
I think so. It's if you count the amount of collaborating we did on the music videos, to a certain point, is a kind of a writing.
Certainly, yeah, of course.
But even well before he took over the directing reins of his own videos, well before that, he was essentially writing all of them. Meaning, even before he took over the reins, there was a point much earlier than that where it was clear he didn't need me, nor did I felt like it was not even my bid to intrude. I felt like, it was like he was so crystal clear, just as he is in his songwriting. He doesn't need, any co-writers in his songwriting. He never has and he never will. And he really didn't need anybody to help him with the storyboards of every joke that would play in every frame of the videos. At a certain point, we knew that, and it was clear, and so he would be the sole writer of those and the sole, of storyboard artist for those. Not like he would actually draw the storyboards, but he would write them. I don't think I wrote it. Yeah, I don't think so. I think that's right.
What was co-writing the movie like? Because it's very much got Weird Al's voice. Nothing personal, but it's
of course.
Obviously very much a Weird Al movie.
Clearly that was my job.
Right.
Look, I was wearing this at the same time, I'm wearing the hat of his manager. So it's fun, and that hat always takes precedence. Anytime we collaborate on anything, we've done it a few times since. We just did it recently on a 3D movie that a couple years back that we did. It was a theme attraction called Al's Brain. It was an 11-minute 3D movie about the human brain. That was a very, very cool project. That was actually I kind of thought it up and pitched it and got it sold. But even still, I mean, I was more actively involved in a way as a producer. But even there, I'm always wearing my manager's hat first because that does come first. So when we were writing the script, when you say, it has his voice, that was my first job, was to make sure it did. And that anything I was going to offer needed to fit that. And I think at that point, I did and still do know his voice well enough that I was able to contribute like that. The actual process itself was interesting, funny, and excruciating, actually, in a way. And the reason I say that is because we have very, very different styles. He is intensely methodical. Al has notebook after notebook of notes that he keeps, on any project that he does and any song that he writes. He is almost like the ultimate nerd that way, where he's scientific with his comedy. And a lot of that is his field work. Any scientist does all the field work, right? That's his his process when he's writing and when he's creating something. So the way that translates and I'm very different. I just kind of shoot from the hip and I figure we'll sort of go back and make it better later, So I want to just kind of be rolling along. But what would happen is either one of us might throw out a joke in the room or a line in the room, and suddenly he'd stop and he'd look off in the distance for 10 minutes at a time. There'd be just silence in the room. I'm sitting there waiting for him while his wheels are turning, And then after 10 minutes, he might go, yeah, that works. We'll go, no, that doesn't work.
Just crunching the numbers, kind of.
Crunching the comedy numbers. That's exactly right, Where for me, it wasn't, it was like I said, it's just a style thing. For me, it was more like let's get through it, we'll do a rewrite later. Let's just keep let's be more spontaneous, and that's not how he works. But we got through it. It was fine. I would say it got strained a little bit, weeks in. It took us probably about a month or so to write the script, and probably a couple, 2-3 weeks in, towards the end, it was getting, he and I were both feeling it. We were already joined at the hip as manager and artist in a non-traditional way, meaning because I always at some level collaborated in the comedy, if you will, even on a purely business level, if that makes sense.
Is that unusual to have that kind of relationship between a manager and an artist where you're also sometimes co-writing, you're sometimes directing their videos?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's mostly a business partnership. I mean, most managers see their client as, God, I hate to say it, but it's a commodity. And I'm not saying that anything against managers. It's just the same way the record labels do that. I think managers clearly understand, they have to understand the art more in order to remain in a strong relationship with their artist. You can't just simply ignore the art. You've got to understand it as best you can. But so many managers come at it recognizing a commodity and then looking to see how you market that commodity. And yeah, for me and Al, I understood the comedy. I understood his art to a point where we could collaborate and I could help him maintain his voice at those times that we did. And I always help him maintain his voice when there might be certain things where, you don't want to do this. This is not your voice, Now, I don't have to do that often because he also knows that. I mean, he rarely ever puts himself in a position to shoot himself in the foot that way, But yeah, I guess so. I mean, there's only that is measured in the longevity, right? And it's, the most famous manager, I suppose, was, and still is, John Landau for Bruce Springsteen. I think Landau, when he saw, I think his take on Bruce when Bruce was first starting was really, in essence, if you boil it down, was my take on Al.
How so?
Well, and just that, he saw the future of rock and roll as Bruce. He understood Bruce at a level that was more than Bruce is a commodity.
Mm-hmm.
And Bruce has had, John Landau was his manager now all these years. I saw Al as like the future of comedy in a way, It wasn't just like, well, here's an interesting act that can maybe sell a few records, and then I'll, when you think that way, you're also scouring the market for who else can I manage and how can I parlay managing this client into another client. I never did that, actually. It's funny. He always kept me so busy and so interested and so happy being able to work with his product, if you will, because it's such fun. I mean, what a great gig to have, right?
Yeah.
So,
You were so right that he was the future of comedy. There was a lot of foresight, because now everyone's doing funny music videos on the internet. I've done a handful myself, and there's just everywhere now. Like what he was doing, you see so many more people doing now. Do you feel that pressure that there's more competition?
No, you know what? I don't feel like there's competition. You can't compete with Al.
I think that's true.
He would never say that. And in a way, I suppose it's, look, when I say that, it's, it's why have there not been any other parody artists over the years when there were even, as much of a niche as he has had over the years. You know what I mean? Because there's only one Al. There's only one guy who is so talented and so deep comedically at that level. That's, so you can't compete. You know what I mean? It's just, and we certainly welcome and admire. I mean, there's all the people that are doing it now.
I think the reason Al's so unique, or one reason there's only one Al, is like you were saying before, there are a lot of Alan Shermans. There were a lot of guys who had a hit here or there, but Al has had sustained hits over 3 decades now. Is that right?
Right.
Yeah, we just hit over 3 decades. And he's still putting out stuff.
The longevity comes from a degree of talent that, after a while, again, competition almost doesn't come into it.
Yeah.
It simply doesn't, because when you're that good, you're in a class by yourself. You're one of very few people, that has a certain degree and level of talent that's really by yourself,
Speaking of his longevity, Rolling Stone recently did a survey to find out people's favorite Weird Al songs, which I think is really interesting, because I think if you did favorite Bruce Springsteen songs, I could probably guess what the top 5 are going to be. But favorite Weird Al songs, there's a large catalog there. Did you see this survey?
I did.
I was going to ask you, were you surprised with the results? I was going to ask you to guess them. I guess you must have seen. That's probably your job as manager, to be on top of that kind of thing. Were you surprised at the results? Do you remember them?
Remind me.
Okay. Number 5 was The Saga Begins from 1999. And again, I'm giving the years just because it spans such a long amount of time.
Yeah.
Saga Begins, 1999.
Yeah.
Eat It, 1984. Albuquerque, 1999.
Yeah.
White and Nerdy, 2006. And number 1, you know what number 1 is? No, it could be anything. It could be anything. Any guesses?
Well, I suppose I would have guessed, I don't know, Amish Paradise.
Amish Paradise, number 1.
Well,
Amish
Paradise, it's almost like the chart that you just read back mirrors from a sales standpoint, almost.
Even Albuquerque, because that's not a parody.
Well, no, you're right about that.
Albuquerque's kind of an outlier there.
You're right about that.
But generally, those are 4 of his biggest selling songs. And there were some other ones, like One More Minute, which I imagine was probably not one of, again, just because it wasn't a parody. That was number 10, I believe, which is a real fan's choice there.
Uh-huh.
Do you have a favorite Weird Al song?
Do I? It's usually an original. Well, you know what? Yeah, I think my favorite song might be Craigslist. But you see, the reason for that is very personal. I mean, growing up, I was a giant Doors fan.
Mm-hmm.
I saw them live several times, and that's sort of part of my background is like 60s counterculture combined with modern comedy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he was really preaching to the choir with me on that one. I thought he nailed it. I was probably his toughest critic, even though that's not my job to do that, nor was it my intention, nor was I positioning myself to do that. But internally, I was feeling like I'm going to be his toughest critic.
You just got to nail this one.
Because I knew the Doors. I knew them really well.
How did you get Ray Kaczmarek involved? He was the original keyboardist for the Doors. And he plays on the Manzarek.
That's right.
How did he get involved?
Well, it's the same. Whenever we get anybody involved at this point, it's just you call them up. It's usually I'll do it. I'll go to them or the manager if he knows them or he has a phone number or if he has, a contact with Ray, I believe. How do we get Ray? I don't remember if it was him or me.
Do you try that with every song, though? Or were you just...
No.
So for this one, you were just like, we should get... Because the Doors have such a unique keyboard.
Yeah, exactly. He was like, God, that is so iconic. To use the word iconic again,
Mm-hmm.
I mean...
No, I think that's a fair use of it.
Oh, my God. I mean, it's sort of like... Yeah, it's like, he's got to do that. Same thing, when we offered, it's on the... for UHF, when we did Money for Nothing parody.
Mark Knopfler plays
Mark Knopfler. I mean, that's a great example where, I talk about an iconic part and an iconic sound, and it's like, and we certainly weren't cocky enough at that point to think, oh, well, he'll certainly do it. But we thought we had a good chance, and we threw it out to Mark, and the answer that came back was Mark said, from his manager, was Mark says he'll do it as long as he gets to play guitar on the parody track.
Do you think it was just something where he wanted to be a part of it because he thought it sounded fun, or was he like, no one plays my riff but me?
I think it was the first one. He's got if you know anything about him, you know that everything I've ever read about Mark, I've never had the pleasure to meet him, but it sounds like he's a really sweet, cool guy who I think just got the joke. But actually, you know what? It's not simply my intuition about that. I will tell you that it's when I got the call from his manager to say that he would do it. He said, he calls me up and he says, the first thing he said to me, one of the things we did is we had sent him a copy of this book now that costs you, if you want to find it, you have to like pay $1,000 for it on eBay. It's called The Authorized Al, which was a companion piece to the Complete Al.
Man, I thought I had every piece of Weird Al memorabilia. I don't have that one.
Yeah,
I have the Complete Al.
If you go on eBay, you'll see it selling for $1,000. Yeah, it's crazy. So anyway, it was right around the time it had come out. So I always, I'm always, as I'm doing my managerial duty, and if I'm pitching something, quote unquote, here's his latest album, here's his latest this or that, and so I sent the manager and I sent Mark, I sent him the Authorized Al. And so when his manager called me, the first thing he said was, I can't get Mark Knopfler to stop laughing. He's got this book in his hands. I can't tear it out of his hands. We got to go do a show. He's having a total ball reading this book, Mm-hmm. So that just told me where his head was at, right? So I think it was the former. I think he wanted to be in on the joke to the point where he wanted to play on the album because it was just a really cool thing.
Did he know that one was going in the movie?
I don't recall.
How did you end up... I always wondered how that specific song ended up in the movie, because it's kind of an unusual one for Al, because it's one song... It's a parody, but it's like the music from one song with the lyrics from another, and he just crossed those two over, as opposed to writing his own lyrics to it. So I just thought that was an interesting choice.
Because, well, it would have been an interesting choice if it had just been released as a single without a movie for that same reason, right?
Yeah, and there's other ones. And I guess the other one's TV theme. The one I'm thinking of is a Brady Bunch
That's
theme.
right,
Set
yeah.
to, what is that set to? I'm doing the same thing you are.
Dance.
Safety Dance.
Safety Dance,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, look, it's how, I can't, yes, I can't, interpret how his brain works for you on that level. You know what I mean? When he comes up with an idea like that, it's just like, he just goes for it. I didn't question him at the time. It fit. You know what I mean? It's sort of like and it always fits because the way he constructs his comedy always fits because he's totally true to himself.
But how'd you select that song for the movie? Because the movie kind of stops and there's like a music video.
Well, yeah. You know what? It was total, again, to use that word, serendipity. It was a combination of, Money for Nothing was a giant hit at the time. So it made sense if we're going to put a parody. We got to do a music video.
Right.
Got to do it for the
obviously,
movie,
yeah.
Right. I think they would have actually liked us to have done more. And we said from the outset, it's not going to be a square peg in a round hole that way. We're just going to do whatever feels organic to the film. And so we only ended up having that one idea. Or he did, I guess, for that one song. It was a huge song at the time, and it was about TV.
Yeah, so
his idea was so it was to turn it into a TV themed thing. UHF is all about TV. I mean, talk about a perfect fit. So it was just a perfect fit, period.
It's a great part of the movie. And again, to use the word iconic, it's such an iconic music video.
Yeah. There's a great story behind that, by the way, which is we had run out of money at that point. It was one of the last things we did. And there was a really good friend of mine and of ours named Rick Morris who ran the local post house where you do post-production for videos and for TV shows and things like that. Rick was a great fan, a great friend. And I called him because we knew we needed that. We knew that so much of the expense was going to come in the animation. Animation is a huge expense,
Especially that was computer animation at a time when there was not a whole lot of computer animation.
That's exactly right. And I don't know how it came about, but I called him saying, "You got any ideas for this? Because we're out of money. We got to do this, and we don't know how to do this. How to accomplish this." With this would normally be a $200,000 to $300,000 movie video easily. And he said, and it was just again, this is the part of the luck and the timing and having a charmed life, I guess. Now it's not to say everything's gone our way, but certainly a lot has. And this is a great example where he said, I'm looking to buy out my partners right now. I know how to do that, and that meaning the computer animation that they did for Money for Nothing. I can do that at home on my computer. You pay me a fraction of what you'd pay a computer animation house. But for me, it's going to be my down payment on buying these guys out. So I'll do it at home for you after work.
So it's just like this guy who was capable of doing it and just needed a sudden influx of cash.
Exactly right.
And that's now it's in the movie.
That's right.
That's cool. You mentioned earlier that you have some non-OWL related side projects. What are those? Are they funny?
Yeah, a couple. Well, let's see. How many? I mean, my first one was, I'm not going to recount them all, but actually my very first one was not funny per se, but it certainly had lots of comedy in it. I packaged a show. The idea was I had a client who I managed among Al as my first clients, named James Hall, who was an expert in TV commercials, and a good friend of mine who later became my partner in my management company. At the time was the head of current at NBC, which means you are overseeing the shows that are on the air. Brandon Tartikoff was the head. He's a sort of legendary head of a network. He's passed away long ago. But Brandon was the head of the network. Hamilton was my friend. I called him up. I said, I got this wacky idea. Has anybody ever done a TV show on like the best TV commercials? And he paused and he's like, duh. It's like, I can't. Why? No, nobody's ever done that. And why on earth has no one ever done that? And it's a really good idea. There's got to be a catch to it. Like probably getting the rights is going to be impossible. Let me do some research. He calls me back a day or two later, and he says, well, I did the research, and there's not a problem as long as we can get the rights, and we don't think you or I can get the rights. We don't think you'll have a problem getting the rights because this is a tribute. You're not making fun of anybody.
Yeah, they usually pay to get them shown.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I partnered with Johnny Carson and Johnny Carson Production because I hadn't done a show at that point. They wanted somebody who had the chops, and so we made this little show called TV's Greatest Commercials. It was the number 4. It was the fourth highest rating show they'd had at all year. It was a giant hit, and it went on to become, as you know, it was a brand for years.
Yeah.
Dick Clark bought out essentially the brand, and I stopped being involved, and he did them for many years. That was my first show.
That's cool. Did you get to work with Johnny Carson at all?
I didn't.
Oh man,
I know.
I
know. I was like, it was this production company,
Yeah.
so I was like 1 degree of separation, but I never finished that 1 degree. Right.
That's a really interesting project, though, and now obviously you see those shows all the time.
Right.
What are some others?
So then the next one that I did was, again, this was now Hamilton and I were co-producing. We had now started our company. He was the partner, the guy his name is Hamilton Cloud, and he was the guy at NBC, and he became my partner. Now we had this idea to do a variety show. It was sort of your classic. This was the pitch that was going around. Somehow we got it sold because of Hamilton's his relationship with Brandon Tartikoff. Mm-hmm. The pitch was, we want to do Ed Sullivan on acid. We want to do this whacked out, completely bizarre variety show. And so we sold it. Little did we know at the time that, we were being used politically as like this whole story about how essentially we got word later that he never had any intention of really picking us up. This was, we were told outright, well, interestingly, I'm looking for a replacement for Saturday Night Live, and this could fit that. So I'm gonna commission that. So we got to make that as a TV show. Later on, we found out he really never had any intention. He was just it was kind of a wake-up call to Lorne Michaels, mm-hmm. I guess, at the time, because they were really having trouble with their ratings.
I imagine that kind of thing happens all the time.
And it does. Of course it does, yeah. And gosh, when you're making a TV show, you don't ever expect you're going to make a hit show. So it's not like we were bitter or anything. But anyway, I made this show called The Fun Zone. No, not The Fun Zone. Wait. It was Welcome. No, yeah, of course. It was called Welcome to the Fun Zone. And in fact, I had Al do the music. There's all kinds of little stories, right? But in the Fun Zone, what fleshed out that idea, by the way, is I love the show, by the way, to this day. We had Howie Mandel, Carlos Santana, and the Fabulous Thunderbirds as our musical guests, Bozo the Clown as a live guest being interviewed by Dr. Demento.
Cool.
Talking about the footage that he had shot in Africa. So this really was TV on acid. I mean, here's Bozo the Clown showing his home movies from Africa. I mean, it was out there, right? John Candy, we had John Candy and John Carradine. We had do a special short film for us. The golf course that dripped blood. It was a parody on horror movies.
Do you still have the tape of this?
Yeah, sure.
Is it on YouTube?
I never checked if it's on YouTube. It's so rare.
That'd be cool, though.
So rare. And Al, he was still a client, of course, and so I brought him on to perform, and here's another one of those classic weird stories, right? But behind the scenes stories is I'm producer of the show. And Al had never done a theme song. And I said, I want Al not only to perform, and he ended up doing I Lost on Jeopardy live on the show as the other musical act. And I said, I want him to write the theme song. Meanwhile, everybody else, including even my partner, everybody was really on my case about this. They're like, they're like, it was so sacred doing a theme song to a TV show, And I'm like, guys, he can do this. It's going to be great. Don't worry about it. It's like, look at the track record he's got so far, which wasn't huge, but it was clearly enough. You could see his acumen as a writer,
Mm-hmm.
Well, we don't know. We got this guy, what was his name? I'm forgetting his name. He was a guy who had written tons of theme songs, and he was like heavily ensconced in TV writing, And then it was really sort of sad, but true, which is that I got to the level where they rather than simply overrule me outright, and part of it was they saw me as his manager, and so like I'm jaded, I must be, and all that, right? And we did like sort of like our version of a sing-off, where we brought in this guy. Al brought in his sheet music. This guy brought in his sheet music. And they each played what they wrote. And, the other guys barely even paid attention to what Al, wrote. It was a shame. I did the best that I could. I wasn't going to, basically I couldn't go to war over it. I wasn't going to do that. Al didn't want, think he didn't necessarily expect me to do that, because it was essentially, if you will, on the most basic level of conflict of interest, right? Because I managed this,
right, yeah.
Okay. So years later now, if you're a fan, he ended up basically, because Al is so, nothing ever goes to waste for Al. He wrote a great song. I saw it that day in the studio when we went in and did this, sound off. It's like, what's wrong with you guys? This is great. I mean,
Did they pick Ira?
And they picked Ira, this other guy, yeah. And so Al, not letting any good thing go to waste, did the only recorded the only instrumental he ever recorded. Meaning he had written the song. He's like, this is a really good instrumental. I'm going to record it. And he recorded it, and it's on an album. And of course, is now at the head of every Weird Al concert. When the lights go down, you hear "Welcome to the Fun Zone."
Oh, yeah.
So I did that, and then I guess the only other ones I'll mention. I had a lot of fun with. I directed a pilot for what was then. There were two comedy networks. There was Comedy Central, and there was Ha. And Ha. Or was it the Comedy Channel and Ha?
Yeah, I think
that's what it was.
Yeah.
They merged and became Comedy Central. Mm-hmm. It was just when they were merging for the Ha channel, but it was before they had announced the merger and all that. I did a pilot for them. It was a half-an-hour sketch comedy show. And among the stars of that show was Steve Carell doing his first TV show.
Ah.
So there's another sort of Michael Richards moment, right? Mm-hmm. With like, although Michael had done Fridays, Steve hadn't really hardly done anything. And Brian Stiles was another star of that show.
Both improv guys.
Yeah. Second City think about this, right? I mean, we had, and I was set to direct the series. We had Steve Carell and Ryan Stiles amongst the stars, who granted they weren't stars, but you can imagine the sheer talent we had, on screen, right? And all the other cast members were just as good. The reason for that, because one of the production partners was Second City, and they all came from Second City. So we had, and their partner was Imagine, Ron Howard's company. So it was this, it was this total, massively high level, major league shot here. We've got those two guys producing. We have all this talent on screen. And then what happened was, when you were talking earlier about, these things happen. Well, here was a classic story where Second City, Andrew Alexander, the legendary head of Second City, I think he still is, but right? And Imagine had a feud and fell out of bed with each other, and the whole project went up in smoke. So, Ha was ready to buy it in a heartbeat. So talk about something I don't think you'll find even on YouTube. I mean, there's, Carell and Styles and all these great people from this thing from Second City and Imagine, and it never saw the light of day. But I was very pleased with that, and I was really happy with it. As I said, I would have done the series, but never got the chance. And then the other one, I guess, that I would mention that that is not comedy, that something I really enjoyed is about 10 years ago. I'm a major blues fan. And I did a documentary called Blues Story, where I did a documentary which featured the first generation artists of blues artists and blues musicians. It had never been done before. I'd always been a huge fan of blues, and any doc I ever saw in the blues featured these white college professors talking about what blues was about, and it really just pissed me off all the time, just like, this is nuts. Because there are all these guys who are not speaking for themselves. It was never done. It was almost like the TV's greatest commercials.
Just such an obvious idea.
It's like, these guys, they're still alive. They're in their 80s and 90s, some were in their 70s, but they ain't going to be around much longer, and they've never been captured properly. So I did that, and they're all gone now. I mean, the only ones that are left are Buddy Guy and B.B. King, I think, and Bobby Bland. I think I had 20 of them, and I think all of them are gone now.
Was it refreshing doing something that wasn't comedy?
Yeah.
I bet it was.
But you know what? It was as much a passion, a work. It was such a passion play for me. The way really comedy is. I mean, I love comedy. It's a passion work for me. I was passionate about blues. So it was more about the passion than it was about being refreshing that it wasn't comedy. You know what I mean? It wasn't like I was looking for something serious, although I would love to be doing more, just...
Did you tell these blues musicians, these legendary blues musicians, that you were Weird Al's manager?
No, and they wouldn't have known if I did.
You don't think so? You don't think B.B. King knows who Weird Al is?
He might, but probably nobody else did.
I think they know.
Maybe. I don't know.
So now's the time of the show where we plug things. What does Weird Al have coming out soon? We got the book.
The book, Weird Al the Book, Abrams, coffee table book about his, which is, this wonderfully, lavishly illustrated book on his life and career, which, as you said, was essentially written by Nathan Rabin from AV Club, and Al contributes like his tweets and the captions to the photos. But that's coming out as we speak. If you go on, you can pre-order it right now on Amazon, and I think the official release date is October 1st.
I feel like there was a time when for Weird Al, you'd have to wait a few years between albums, but now it seems like maybe it's just because I follow him on Twitter or something, there's just a constant stream of Al. You see him on shows, you see him doing voices, and I don't know, it's just more, you get more of it than you used to.
I think a lot of that has to do with internet presence,
videos, yeah.
And
he
because
did like 14 videos, or he did a video for every song on his last album.
Well, and that too, yeah, that was huge. I mean, and even on the album before that, all the originals had videos. That's a part, and it's another part of his genius, and it's another part of a testament to who he is the talent. There's just the sheer talent. The people that agree to do these videos for a dime, because we don't have a budget for that, and especially now we don't have a budget for that with what's happening in the record business. But people just want to be part of it, I
think a lot of people, like myself, this grew up on this, and this is a major part of their comedy education and their just general education.
It's part of his being an icon, it's gotten to this point where, the story that I tell is similar to one where a good buddy of mine is a guy named Larry Klein, who was Dick Clark's right hand for many, many years. And Larry told this story about how he and Dick were walking through the lobby of a hotel once, and Bob Dylan was coming at them from the other direction. And they come, and it was, not planned or anything. And they literally bump into each other. And Dylan is like speechless, and he's like mumbling, and he's like, he's practically on his knees, And Larry looks at Dick, looks at and I call him Dick first name because we've had the pleasure, we work with Dick on the Weird Al show. Oh, right, so right. He was a partner, right? Anyway, Dick, so it was around that time I was told the story that Dick looks at Larry and goes, "What was that about?" And he goes, "You're Dick Clark." And he goes, "Oh." okay, I guess, And I tell that story because we get, we've now, Al's become such an icon that we get that it's really gratifying and wonderful. I mean, that he gets that all the time, the influence that he's had on so many people that will go, that are just, where they'll say, the reason I got into the entertainment business, the reason I got into broadcasting.
Yeah.
And it's really phenomenal, the number of people really that say that, and it really is testament to the impact that he's had on people's lives,
Yeah, I think for me, certainly he's a major reason I got into comedy, but also listening as a kid, I think it made me realize that it was okay and maybe even kind of cool to be weird and to be not normal, and so I think for me, anyway, the influence is more than just the comedy and the things I like. It's a whole world outlook.
That's right. And that, of course, came full circle when he actually memorialized that exact notion by writing and recording White and Nerdy.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
So it was no longer sort of just, this whole universe is the White and Nerdy universe. He gave recorded license to it.
Yeah. And but especially at the time in the 80s, now it's okay to be nerdy, and I think Weird Al is one of the people that kind of cleared that path and made it, made it okay to make it socially acceptable to be nerdy and dorky about things. And you're one of the people that helped get him there.
It's been an honor and a privilege. All those sort of corny things, it's all true. I mean, it's been an amazing ride, and it still is, right? I mean,
I was going to say that about the past hour. It has been an honor and a privilege to have you on the show to talk about this stuff. It's incredible. It really has had a huge influence on me, and thank you so much for doing it.
It's been my pleasure.
Well, that pretty much made having a podcast worth it. Thank you again, Jay, and keep up the incredible, incredible work. Guys, Jeff Rubin shows usually come out every single Tuesday, but as you know, I take off the first Tuesday of any month. That is next week, but I will be back on October 13th. I think it's the 13th. The second week of October. I will be back with Justin Wong, one of the greatest fighting game players of all time. Fighting games, of course, the genre, best exemplified by games like Mortal Kombat, by games like Street Fighter. Justin is one of the best fighting game players of all time. He has several Marvel vs. Capcom 2 titles. He was, at a time, the best Mortal Kombat 9 player in the world. Here is what that interview is going to sound like. So if you didn't get into Street Fighter 2, how did you start taking fighting games seriously?
Because at Chinatown Fair, it was very, very fighting game heavy. They had Street Fighter Alpha 2, Street Fighter 2, Street Fighter 3, Marvel Superheroes, Marvel vs. Capcom 1. They have a bunch of fighting games from every genre and every company making them. And New York was very heavy into playing competitively. And in terms of competitively back then, it wasn't really on some esports level or company sponsored. It was basically whoever was part of the community, and a lot of the tournament organizers were from the community because they just wanted to see who was the best in the USA.
How did you start getting good?
Well, I used to play the Marvel series with my high school friends, and we thought we were good. So we always go after school, after 3 o'clock. We always went to the arcade, but we always had to leave at 5. So one day I stayed after 5, and there was the 7 p.m. crew when people get off work type of thing, and they beat me so bad. And the people that beat me really bad were the actual competitive players that went to tournaments and stuff. And from there I just kept kicking it with them and kept losing a lot more. And then eventually, I just got a lot better.
It's almost really like anything. If you compete against people that are better than you, you're going to get better.
Oh, yeah, because, you get to see, why'd you get hit there? Why did I lose there? And why did this person win? So you kind of just try to capitalize off of it. If you
How much
win,
time
first
are you
place,
spending in the arcade?
Probably as much as I can, and as much as I didn't get in trouble with my family. So if I was going to school, I get up at 3. I was there 2 hours on school nights, but when it came to weekends, I was there from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m.
So this was just all the time?
Yeah, pretty much.
Was it fun?
It was really fun because I just wanted to beat them and try to be better than them. And at the time there were so many different type of new fighting games coming out for the arcades.
What year is this?
1999.
So this is like
after Street Fighter 3.
So at this point, is there a professional fighting game scene?
Yeah, well, the thing is, there's a different term of professionally. It's more of a hobby. Like it's like you go to a bowling alley and you join the local bowling team to enter the local bowling tournaments. It's stuff like that. Like if you win like first place for the tournament, you wouldn't get like $10,000. You'd probably get like a couple $100. But we were playing because we wanted to see who was the best.
Find out who was the best on October 13th when the Jeff Rubin Show returns. I'm sorry I have to take the first week of the month off. I have to ritually sacrifice a virgin to ensure a fruitful harvest of guests for October. It worked for September. I'll be back. In the meantime, you can follow me on Twitter, where I am at Jeff Rubin Show, on my Tumblr at jeffrubin.com, my Facebook fan page, and at youtube.com/JeffRubin. Bye.